Welcome back to Professor Sky's class. Well, you're not actually taking the class. I'm just uploading some lectures onto YouTube. FCE 207, Haiti, the most important country in the world. This is going to be a slightly different video than usual because I'm actually going to be dropping my daughter off at college tomorrow. I'm going to be missing the class that I normally teach. So what you're going to see is like actually what they are going to be taking notes on and what they are going to be graded on. Normally, I do a normal lecture. This is a recorded lecture. So it may sound a little different. I won't be addressing you, the YouTube audience. I'll be addressing my students. Just as a reminder, this is not the same thing as taking a class. So I want to emphasize that YouTube learning is good, but it's passive learning. And because it's passive learning, it's less deep. You retain less. You just can't help it. So if you want to take notes along with my students, go for it. If you want to follow the homework, I'll give you the homework. Okay. But you can't participate in the group activities and I won't be able to assess the work that you do. You won't be able to have access to the questions and the exams and all that stuff. Um, I do also want to say that this is a class which I have recently redesigned. It is primarily for freshmen. So you have to imagine that my audience is mostly like 17 and 18-year-old kids from Western New York and some of the five boroughs of New York City. That's most of my students. So I'm doing my best to have it be like a deep and meaningful learning experience while also understanding that these are students who grew up in the time of COVID. And this is really a great opportunity to exercise their critical thinking skills, but it's also a balancing act as a professor. So that's just a thing to think about while you watch me give this essay. So here we go. I'm going to now leave the part where I'm talking to you, YouTube, and I'm going to start the part where I talk to students. Sound good to you, Toussaint? Sounds good to me. Hi, class. Sorry that I can't make it today. I'm dropping off my daughter. I'm very excited about that. That'll be really fun. But we have a good class today. It's going to be, as a reminder, get out your notebooks, get ready to take notes, get ready to submit your notes to Brightspace. Let's get going. So let me get to the class. Let me do share PowerPoint. Here we go. Like a real old man, I am just going to narrate all the things I'm doing as I do them technologically. Okay. Students and friends, I am Professor Sky. My name is perhaps known to you. I've undertaken to teach about Haiti. I want curiosity and a thirst for complex understanding to reign in this class. I am working to help that happen. Unite yourselves and learn with me for the same cause. Today's class is called The People of Saint-Domingue. A reminder, Saint-Domingue is what Haiti was called after it was given to the French by the Treaty of Ryswick, as opposed to Santo Domingo, which was the Spanish side. We're going to be talking about the people. All right. First, we'll start off with an unintended consequence revision. And then I'm going to be telling you story. It's like a little story time. I'm going to try to humanize, narrativize these people who can sometimes just be lost as numbers as opposed to as people. I apologize for the sound behind me. There's going to be some lawnmowers and wind and stuff, but hey, it's an outdoor. My students always want me to teach outside. I can't. I use too many PowerPoints. So hey, maybe you're watching this outside. Oh, this is what your notebook should look like, except you should have the correct date up there. It's going to be the 29th. So all right, fine. I'll correct that. Oh, geez. Come on, Sky. Come on, Professor Sky. Get this straight. Continue to share. So this is what it should look like. This is what your notebook should look like right now, and you'll be filling it out as you watch, and then you'll be uploading that to Brightspace to get credit for having today's class. There's also homework for next Monday, next Wednesday. Monday's Labor Day, so don't forget that as well. So if we were in class, I would be doing a unintended consequence revision. This is a review of what we covered last class, all the unintended consequences that led to the current state of Haiti, all the different catastrophic coincidences that led to where we would end up. Okay, so if we were in class, I would have it be a table write. You'd be in a group of four where one person writes, and that would be that. But I'll just review it very briefly. The unintended consequence of the Taino being nice and sharing gold with Columbus is that Columbus told the king and queen of Spain, and all of a sudden they wanted to own the territory and take possession of the people and the land. Spaniards abandoned Hispaniola because there was no gold, allowed this whole area to be occupied by other places, other forces, in particular, French pirates. Okay. But also agricultural people that ended up leaving this sort of void in the island that is now called Haiti, or the part of the island that's now called Haiti. The Spaniards left some pigs and cows, which meant that the people there could actually have a more robust agricultural product and more abilities to sustain life on a rather inhospitable island in places. These same French pirates would ask for a royal governor to protect them because the Spaniards were always fighting against them and they're constantly going back and forth. And what does that mean? That means that once that happens, that means the French Empire all of a sudden now has an interest in the land. It is part of the French Empire, which is a huge deal. De las Casas lobbies to stop enslaving the indigenous people in favor of Africans. Sadly, that is what will lead to, or help lead to, the triangular slave trade. Okay, these are all the materials that I'll be using to talk about today's class. Revolutions podcast by Mike Duncan. That's the I am using the division that he used of the three different peoples of Saint-Domingue. I'm sort of doing it in a different way, but I'm building a lot of it off that. Also, Black Jacobin, for some of you who read that, the Black Jacobins, a lot of what we're going to be talking about is infused with that. And of course, Laurent Dubois' Aftershocks of History. Reminder, we're going to be talking about using some archaic terminology. As I say fairly often, language changes. Things that are okay, we understand that they are not okay, and then we change the way we talk. The example I always give is your children will look down on you for using terms like stupid and idiot, which are ableistic terms that should not be in our vocabulary. It is not okay that we use those terms, but we do. So in the future, when someone's reading something that you wrote and you use those terms, they will look at it like, and there's going to be some of that in this class, okay, for multiple reasons. One, of course, is the word slave. It's very good that in the past few years, there's been a huge emphasis on referring to enslaved people as enslaved people, not as slaves. Slave is a dehumanizing word. Even Anakin Skywalker understood this in episode 1, Phantom Menace, when Padme says, "Are you a slave?" And he says, "No, I'm a person and my name is Anakin." It's a goofy line of dialogue, but it's actually really important. So all the people who we call slaves are not slaves, they're enslaved people. That said, most of the things that we are studying are before this linguistic change. The podcast was recorded in 2014, before this linguistic change. Black Jacobins is written by a black man, but still uses this term because this was before we understood as a civilization that this term is archaic. I may at times use this term as well. I will try to correct myself instantly. If I do not, feel free to raise your hand or tell me, Sky, you messed up. I am trying to erase this word from my vocabulary, but it has been there for 47 years. It's going to take me some time. I ask for your grace. Now, the other terminology that we're going to be describing, whites, blacks, and coloreds, these are not preferred nomenclature either, but this is more of a historical definition. That these are the three groups of people who live there. They had all different life experiences. We're going to be getting more into detail, but just please understand that, I'm not using the term colored because I think it's an appropriate term. I'm using it because it is a historically accurate term. It's also worth noting, that the United Negro College Fund uses the word Negro, which now is considered to be pejorative, but it's still the name of the organization because it's a historical organization. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is a similar question. Okay, things change, language moves. Okay, enough precaution there. So let's have story time, everybody. Let's have story time. Let's tell some stories about some of these people who live in the island that live in the part of this island that is now called Saint-Domingue. Let's get to the complexity of Saint-Domingue. Okay, I'm not just going to talk about three groups, whites, coloreds, blacks. I'm going to be talking about three kinds of whites, three kinds of coloreds, three kinds of blacks. I'm going to be telling you a story about each of these 9 figures. These stories are completely made up. There's no real names. I just took these images off of Google Image. Some of them are from Haiti, some are probably from Martinique. I'm just kind of throwing these images all together. I'm using this to illustrate a story, to try to help you understand that for all these things that we're talking about, we are talking about human beings. And I want to talk about them. And as I introduce these characters to you, who I've named X, Y, and Z, just out of simplicity, we're going to follow their history. We're going to see what they do during the revolution. We're going to see what their children do. We're going to see what their grandchildren do. We're going to see some of them might be related to other people, right? We're going to be imagining this. I want to try to make it more personal and more tangible. So let's start with the largest population in Saint Domingue, the Black population. Okay, with Black X, Black Y, and Black Z. There are our dramatis personae, and let us start with Black X. Black X. I tried to write an imaginary story about who this person could be. Okay, 1766, he is born a part of the Congo people in West Africa. All right, so there you're going to see the Congo Kingdom. You see right on the coast there. I put a little blue box. You see that down there in the Bantu states. He cares for his baby sister. Sometimes he gets frustrated that he is asked to care for his baby sister as much as he does while his parents are busy doing other things, but he really enjoys her company and loves caring for her, and he sings her a little song whenever she gets really upset. It's a little melody. Okay, that's what he sings for her. Because he's a human being, you understand? He's not a slave. He's not even Black X. The imaginary person I'm talking about has an internal life, just like you. Every day wakes up and thinks about the things he's going to do every single day, just like you. Thinks about his future, thinks about his past, just like you. Has a complete and total human experience, just like you. He enjoys plantains, right? He enjoys that. He enjoys plantains, especially when they are ripe. But he will eat them when they're a little underripe. But if they're overripe, he usually tries to just pass them off to his sister. Okay, we're talking a human being. This doesn't have to be in your notes, all these details. I'm just trying to emphasize the humanity that we're talking about here. Because sadly, what happens? There he is. His family is killed. Okay, his mother's killed. His sister's raped, separated from his father and his brother. Okay, that's the story. That's what's happened. That's the terrible reality that we're dealing here with this person who really likes his, little sister, you know? That's what happened. This is what happened. This was the historical reality of this terrible practice. He left on the slave ship known as L'Amour in 1786. Now, this is a real slave ship, which was docked out of the city of Nantes. Nantes is a beautiful city, a gorgeous city. Gorgeous city. Really, really nice city. They have a soccer team. Pretty good. They wear all yellow jerseys. They're not great, but they'll win from time to time. And this is a depiction of what it looked like, but this is this is not what it looked like for most of the time. This right here, what you see, this would be a 5-star Ritz hotel compared to the conditions that they actually lived in. This is the conditions that they lived in. Now, I need to take a second here and just talk about diversified curriculum. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s where already people understood that the curriculum was too based on old white history, right? That basically the story of the conquerors, the people who dominated, and never the story of the people who might have been their historical victims. As time goes on, we spent more and more energy correctly understanding that you need to understand the history of the people whose history has not been validated for centuries. So this has been great. I see it in my children. The daughter who I'm dropping off to high school, she has understanding of the triangular slave trade from her high school. These are important things that we need to know, and I want to say, good job, American school system, for teaching these complicated bits of history. Sadly, we are going backwards currently, and there is a push to remove studying difficult issues which make history more complex. So we'll see. In 10 years, maybe this image will be completely new to my students. But I'm going to assume that this kind of image is not completely new to you like it was to me when I was 24 when I first saw this image of what a slave ship actually looked like. It was terrible. Now, where is Black X? Do you see him? There he is. Remember? Du, 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 du. He's thinking about the song that he would sing to her, okay? The last thing he remembered seeing her was her being torn off into the bushes, okay? I'm trying to make it terrible because it is terrible, all right? He sees his whole family. He sees his mom go. He sees his dad taken, all right? This is his life. There he is. He's wishing he's eating plantains, but instead he's in a little box. He's right here. Do you see him? He's over there. These are the conditions, 2 by 5, for months on the open sea. Maybe the most obscene thing about this particular example, if you're not claustrophobic, you are now, is that this boat is called l'amour, which in French, I would ask anyone here who speaks French, what does l'amour mean? It means love. It means love. I'll just say it one more time. It means love. Here's how C.L.R. James describes it. No place on earth, observed one writer of the time, concentrated so much misery as the hold of a slave ship. Just as a reminder, concentration of misery is important. If you have a poor, angry, sad, depressed person living in a little shack, and the closest person who is poor, sad, depressed, and angry is 3 miles away, there's no concentration effect. He's just there. But say you take that person and you put them, I don't know, in an apartment building where most of the other people are poor, angry, depressed. Okay, that has a concentration effect where it ends up amplifying those feelings of isolation and anger. That sadness. It has an amplification process. So imagine if you are stacked on top of other people, like you are cargo and not human beings. Concentrated misery. It's an interesting thing that C.L.R. James does, where he tries to go against a few narratives that exist about the slave trade and about how the enslaved people felt and how they behaved. There is a sort of myth of a certain docility and maybe even complicity of the enslaved people, which he fights against, talking about the ways they tried to fight against this misery. I'm going to quote him there. They undertook vast hunger strikes, undid their chains, and hurled themselves on the crew in futile attempts at insurrection. What could these inland tribesmen do on an open sea in a complicated sailing vessel? Because most of them were from the inland, they weren't from the coast. To brighten their spirits, it became the custom to force them to dance. Some took the opportunity to jump overboard, uttering cries of triumph as they cleared the vessel and disappeared below the surface. Okay? That's the reality that we have here. This is the triangular slave trade, which I assume you are familiar with, which I was not familiar with until my mid to late 20s. It was a fairly simple system, devastating in its efficiency. You have people build ships in Europe, like in a city like Nantes. All right. And you bring that and maybe some alcohol, some like textiles, some goods down to Africa and money, and you buy people who are kidnapped. You buy them, you steal them, you put them onto your ships, you take the ships over to America where you force them to work. They make sugar, tobacco, and cotton, and indigo, right? They get all those things. And then that goes back to Europe. They can then sell to buy more ships, to buy more people, to make more sugar, to buy more ships, to get more people. It's a constant capitalistic cycle of rich, 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 unbelievable richness. Again, it would have been a downgrade if it was a gold mine. If there was a gold mine, speaking financially, if there was a gold mine in Haiti instead of the sugar plantations, the people who own the sugar plantations would have taken a hit financially. How about another? How about Black Y? Okay, the chief of his tribe. Okay, now he's not from the Bantu states. He's from more north. He's from there, of the Wolof. Born a part of the Wolof people of West Africa, he was a chief and the greatest warrior of his people. Despite the fact he was a great warrior, it could not stop the fact that a rival tribe sells him into slavery. Okay, now this is an interesting thing where perhaps this narrative has been overplayed, that rival tribes would try to enslave each other. If I had time in class, I would say, why does this narrative exist? And you'd talk, and it would be maybe because it implies that maybe they sort of deserved what they got because of how cruel they were to each other. I think it's better if we think about it in the terms that C.L.R. James puts it, where he said tribes had to supply slaves or be sold as slaves themselves, making it much less of an option. It doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but for the point of our story, this noble, brave, proud chief is now just chained to someone right in front of him. There he is, right there. Actually, no, that's him right there, going back and forth. He's taken to the island of Gorée, which is this little teeny tiny island off the coast of Senegal. Of all the places to go before you die, this is probably at the top of my list of places I feel I need to go to best understand and feel the weight of history. There's a place there on the Isle of Gorée called the Slave House. This is where they would be held until they were actually put on those boats and shipped off. There's their holding pens. Here's an image of what it looked like at the time with the overseers and the drivers. Hey, look, there he is. Do you see? Right there. I made it that you can see him. This is actually an image of the time, the slave market of Gorée. And he would go out this door right in the center onto a boat. The door that leads directly onto the ocean was called the door of no return because, of course, they would never return to Africa. They would never return to their homes. They would never return to their family. They would never return to the plantains that they enjoyed eating, or the rice, or whatever. They would never be with the people that they love and who they've been with. They would just be in a little box until they made it to the other side of the ocean to undergo what we're about to describe now, the door of no return. Could you return? Well, it's interesting. This image of President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama is quite powerful. I think it's powerful too because it's a reminder of the complexity of history, because Barack Obama, his ancestors were never at that door or any door like that, right? His ancestors are African from Africa. So they never made the transatlantic slave trade, whereas Michelle Obama's did. Now, I don't know if they went through that door, but still, it's an interesting depiction of this ambiguity and sadness and power. So I hope to go there someday. He is put onto the slave ship known as l'Africain in 1787, and he arrives in the Cap Français, which, as you learned in listening to the podcast, was like the center of everything in. At this point, Port-au-Prince was like a little village. Okay, Le Cap Français was like the New York City of Haiti. It was the absolute center, which makes sense because it was the place where all of the enslaved people would come through. After 2 months at sea in that little tiny box, he is sold at a market in Le Cap Français to Big White X. At the plantation, he meets another enslaved African who arrived a year before. Of course, he meets Black X. They meet uh, on on the plantation. So what did these two people have in common, right? They're African, they're enslaved. So are they the same? They wouldn't even know how to say hi to each other. Okay? Their customs and culture are not at all the same. They're 2,500 miles apart. That's how far apart they are. This is really worth emphasizing, and I'm going to say it again. I really like how in the podcast, how much Mike Duncan emphasized how alienating this whole experience was. Don't think of it as like a European getting an African. Think of it as a Zerblotian. Okay, that's the planet I came up with, the planet Zerblots. They look exactly like us, except they have, I don't know, green skin and yellow eyes and pink hair. All right. It's just that just they look just like human beings, but they just have different skin color. And they show up and they're completely different culture. They have way more technology than we do, and they just start taking us. They just start enslaving us. And and they take one from Indonesia, one from Algeria, one from Spain, and one from a favela in Brazil. And like put them all to work in the same place. What what would they how could they communicate? How could they do anything? Imagine being taken to planet Zerbloths in a spaceship in a little box, and you finally get there, and then everybody who looks a little bit like you, because you at least don't have the green skin, you don't have anything to share amongst yourselves. Okay? That's the reality. That's why we're going to have a creation of a Creole language and a creation of a different religion. What do they all actually have in common? They have in common that they are working on the plantation of Big White X. All right. Now let's describe their working conditions for a second. This is where I would normally have you, the class, just sit there and give me some examples. It is really crucial that we understand that picking that cotton was particularly brutal because of the way you had to dig canals, because of just the nature that sugar cane itself is quite beastly. It's a terrible thing with all these little prickers and everything. This is how it was described in the book. This is somebody describing at the time. There are about 100 men and women of different ages, all occupied in digging ditches in a cane field, the majority of them naked or covered with rags. The sun shone down with a full force on their heads, sweat rolled from all parts of their bodies, their limbs weighed down by the heat, fatigued with the weight of their picks and the resistance of the clayey soil baked hard enough to break their implements, strained themselves to overcome every obstacle. A mournful silence reigned. Exhaustion was stamped on every face, but the hour of rest had not yet come. The pitiless eye of the manager patrolled the gang, and several foremen armed with long whips moved periodically between them, giving stinging blows to all who, worn out by fatigue, were compelled to take a rest, men or women, young or old. That's just what it is in the field. And then once you pick it, you have to immediately treat it, or else it loses its sweetness. So you have to put it into the machine to separate it. And then if you get your arm stuck in there, your arm is just gone. You might just die. Just so many workplace deaths. You have to boil the sugar. If you fall into the boiling vat, then you just die boiled in sugar. The whole thing is extremely dangerous, extremely hot, going on 24 hours a day. No rest for anybody. Absolute misery for this sugar. Misery. That's why up here in upstate New York, if you wanted to say you were against slavery, you only used maple syrup. So what do they have in common? That they're with Big White X. So let's talk about the plantation of Big White X, how Big White X got here, who he is. Okay? He's a nobleman. All right, which means he was born to a family that has land and has power in France. His family owns a very large property on the outside of Nantes. As a matter of fact, if you go to the outside of Nantes, you can see the chateau. They have guided visits every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I'm speaking imaginarily, but there's chateaus like this all over the place, and you can see all the beautiful things that they bought with their blood money. He used his great wealth to buy a sugar plantation. Why do you have to be rich to buy a sugar property? This is another question I would ask you as a class, because it's really expensive. Growing indigo, growing coffee is not that complicated, but in order to get a sugar plantation going, you got to get the flat land, a lot of flat land. You got to dig the irrigation. You got to buy all the machines to do everything. In addition to buying all the labor, it's terrible. It's a lot of money. So really, it's a game where the rich get richer. But who's this guy? Well, that's small white. You see, the whites are complicated too, huh? Right? Everyone's complicated in this. There's nothing simple here. Small white Y, we're going to take as an example of the small whites. As Mike Duncan points out, there were the big and the small. And the small were guys like small white Y. Okay? How did he end up being an overseer for big white X? How did he do that? Well, he had a modest upbringing outside of Marseille, but managed to make a little bit of money. He moved to Saint-Domingue hoping to make a lot of money. Okay? He bought a plantation. He bought some enslaved people. He was on his way, but there was a bad crop. There was a fire in his sugar house, and he went bankrupt. And he had to return the plantation to the bank from which he got the loan. Because it turns out 50% of all plantations were owned by absentee European banks owners. Yikes. If you've ever had an absentee landlord, you know it's not good. It's good to know your landlord, good to know where they live. If they live in another country, if they live in another part of the country, hell, even if they live like more than an hour away from the property, it's not very good. And this is amazing what's happening here. So how did it even work? How is it possible? Right here, look at this, Bordeaux. I went here once. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful city. Unfortunately, the entire thing is covered in blood, but beyond the fact that you are slipping around on the sidewalks because all these beautiful buildings you see were built off the back of enslaved Africans, still you have like this bank, the Banque Courtois in Bordeaux, which, let's say they're the ones who took over a small white wise plantation. How would they maintain that control 4,971 miles away? Well, they would get a procurer who would be the legal power of attorney, be in charge of making sure that everything worked on a legal stance in terms of like deeds and property and contracts and things like that. Then you need a manager who coordinates the property, who figures out how many laborers need to be bought, what material needs to be bought, who needs to be hired to do what. Okay, there's a whole ecosystem around a plantation. And then finally, you need overseers. These are the people who actually manage the actual enslaved people. That's someone like the character that we're talking about now. Okay. He went from an owner to becoming an overseer on a different plantation. This kind of guy is all over the place in the New World. A guy who's like, hey, I'm going to make it big. And then they show up and they don't. And they end up kind of angry and bitter. And sometimes they end up being dangerous. We're going to see. So he had to return to the bank from which he got the loan. And the cool thing about this bank is this bank actually has a lawyer, and that's bourgeois white Z. Here's our third white character. Okay, so this guy is the son of a prosperous Bordeaux merchant. So he's not noble, nor is he kind of hard scrabble. He's like a son of a prosperous Bordeaux merchant. He works as a lawyer for a Bordeaux bank. So that means that like the bank Courtois that now owns this the former plantation of Small White Y, he works for them. He helps them coordinate things. Okay. The cool thing is, at his law firm is bourgeois colored X. We're going to see some complexity here. Again, racism has not reached its final form in Saint-Domingue yet. So at this point, there were so many men, so few women, that it was not natural, but expected that there would be voluntary and involuntary childbirth, children born of the sexual relations between white men and black women, usually that direction, right? So what happened was these people were often free. Often, not always, but often. And so they ended up having their own society. As we'll see at the point of the revolution, there's many of them as there are of white people in Saint-Domingue. So their life experience is very different. They might be close to slavery, but they are not enslaved. So we have bourgeois colored X, who's a law clerk in Le Cap. He's a Creole, which means he's born in Saint-Domingue. His mother is a quadroon. We'll describe that, what that means in specific, but point is she is also it's just so weird saying colored because it's such an offensive term in our modern parlance, but there you go. These were historical terms. Okay. And his father is white. All right. So he does not have all the access to white power, to white privilege, nor does he have the devastating impact of being an African. He is somewhere in between, and he has this job. His mother's brother, okay, so his uncle, who's also a quadroon, is colored Y. Why does he have a whip? Okay, he has a whip because he's also an overseer. He's a quadroon as well, born Creole, started as an overseer, but then was even promoted to a manager because that was possible. Social mobility was possible. You couldn't become big white, right? But you could move up from overseer to manager. I really want to move away from just like white bad, black good, right? It's very, very gray. Everything in this whole class is very, very gray. So we're all here on the plantation of Big White X. So what's left here? We have all three whites accounted for. We have Big White, who owns the plantation. We have the small white Y, who is the overseer. We have the lawyer, who is the law clerk. No, I mean the lawyer at the bank that took Small White Y's bank, right? We have, you get it, right? I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm recapitulating everything. We have two of the colored figures. We have one who's a manager, one who's a law clerk. We have two of the blacks. Both of them are in the fields. But what about the third? Well, we have Black Z. Okay. Black Z, father was Igbo from Western Africa. She is also a Creole born into slavery on the plantation, born in 1750. She's going to be about 40 when the revolution starts. She had a child with another enslaved African. Okay. She had it when she was very young. And do you want to see how he's doing? I'll show you. Ah, rough, rough. Okay. Big White X was like, great. Now I have another enslaved person and I don't even have to go get them. They were just born here. There he is cowering in the corner. But she was a maid. She was a maid for the big white X. And this is the other thing, you know, most labor was done by enslaved Africans, even labor that wasn't as rigorous and terrible as doing sugarcane. So we had a lot of people who would serve inside of a house. There's going to be a fairly large division between uh, people who are enslaved in the fields and people who are enslaved in the house, although we'll see they are going to come together at some point, or else there wouldn't have been any revolution, at least not one that worked. But they do have a different relationship to their slavers. Okay. Sorry, you don't get to be called a slaver person. If you are a slaver, you don't get to be. You don't. I'm not going to worry about your humanity. Um, so lived in the house, and what do you know? She had a baby with Big White X. All right, the man who owns everything. She had a baby with him. Was it consensual? I'll let you determine. I'll let you determine. Can there be consent in this relationship? But the point is, she had his baby. Do you want to see where he is? Well, this baby is going to be colored Z. Whoa, he's looking like he's doing okay. He's not in the field like her other son. He was born free. Big White X, I don't know. I guess despite the fact that he's a terrible person who's profiting off of a terrible process, I guess there's some amount of sentimentality to him. I guess there's some humanity in him where he's able to see his own baby and decide that that baby can be free. Free, 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 as free as anybody. Sent to France for an education. Wow. Okay. Then he comes back and starts a small coffee plantation. His mother was enslaved, and he himself will purchase slaves to have a small coffee plantation off in the mountains. That's the complexity that we're talking about. We now have all 9 figures, and what I want to communicate is the differences of their lives. Each one of them has a favorite color. Each one of them has a song that they like to sing. Each one of them has foods that they like. Each one of them has a perfect ripeness of fruit that they like to eat. Okay? They all are human beings. They all have families and complexity here. But what I want to show is how different their life experiences are, because as you're going to see in the next class, the divisions between them are going to be reinforced. They're going to be made way stronger. And the conflict between them is just going to get more and more and more and more until it explodes. As a reminder of some of the figures that were given in the homework that you did for today, in 1687, it was basically 1-to-1. There were more white people than black people on the island. By 1791, it was 500,000 to 30,000 whites and 30,000 coloreds, which means how can you possibly maintain control that far away? How can you possibly dehumanize and treat people that poorly and expect nothing to happen? I don't know, but that's what they expected. And that's what's going to ultimately lead to the tensions that are ultimately going to lead to the revolution. Just as a little brief aside here, the Code Noir was mentioned. Remember? Remember when the Code Noir was mentioned? The Code Noir was made by this man here, Louis XIV, probably the most powerful person that's ever lived. I don't know, the longest living regent. You see there Versailles. That was where he wanted to live. He didn't want to live in Paris because there's too many people. He lived in Versailles where he could control everything. It's a beautiful place. I've been to the Chateau de Versailles, I don't know, 3, 4 times. It's nice. The only problem is when you try to open up any doors, it's hard because your hands are slipping on the blood because the entire place is filled ceiling to floor with the blood of enslaved Africans, which makes it very difficult to move around. I'm speaking figuratively, but let's talk about it. Okay. Let's talk about it because he was influenced by someone named Colbert. Okay. Colbert, who was his finance minister, who created something called Colbertisme, Colbertism. The power of a country comes from its wealth. Duh, right? You're like, duh, of course it does. They didn't know that, okay? They thought that the power of a country came from the size of its army, came from how much land it had, how many people live there. The idea that money is power is actually an idea that needed to be formulated. And it was Colbert who figured it out, which then is part of the reason that we're going to get into this whole mess with the triangular slave trade, because it's one of the easiest ways to make an insane amount of money for your empire. So when you go to Versailles, which you definitely should, you're going to see this Galerie de Glace where it was so expensive to buy mirrors at this time. It was like one of the most expensive things possible. And it's an entire hallway filled with them. It's essentially like it's like if you play Minecraft and you make a house entirely out of diamonds. Is that relatable to you? I play a bunch of Minecraft. I think I told you that. You know what I'm saying? That's what it's like, except, real life. But again, when you go visit there, you can't even see your reflection because it's like The Shining. You're covered in blood. Just as a reminder, as we talk about Le Code Noir, the term black might sound offensive in the way that I'm using it, but it is a close literal translation that was used. This was the historical term. It's called Le Code Noir, which means the black code. And it is not talking, it is specifically referring to uh, enslaved Africans under the term noir, under the term black. So there we go. So here we have Colbert, Louis XIV, and Le Code Noir. What does it say in Le Code Noir? Blacks too old to work are fed and taken care of by former slave masters. Hey, decent. That seems humane. Freed blacks are true citizens of the country in which they reside. Oh my God. So that means like if you buy your freedom somehow or if someone frees you, you're free. You can do whatever you want. You can start your own plantation. You can work in a law firm. Blacks cannot work on Sunday. Okay, a day off. That's interesting. Blacks must be baptized Catholic. No Protestants or Jews on the island. Now, this is interesting. Remember how we've been talking about Nantes? There was a edict that made it legal to be Protestant in France. There was a huge war of religion in France between the Protestants and the Catholics, two different branches of Christianity. Super bloody, just blood everywhere, killing, 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 terrible. Then there was an edict, the Edict of Nantes, that made it legal essentially to be a Protestant. But then Louis XIV is going to revoke that edict and is going to crack down on Protestantism further. It's not about religion, it's about power. Nothing is ever about religion. It's always about power whenever there's a war of religion. Don't get fooled. No one is actually fighting over God. They're just fighting over power. And here we have no Protestants or Jews on the island. Anti-Semitism has existed for a long time. Here is a perfect example of that from 1685. So now you might think this is a good thing, right? Like here's an image from the time of an enslaved person appearing and holding the Code Noir and asking, hey, listen, I was told these things. I was given these freedoms. I was told I was supposed to get enough food to eat. I was told that I was supposed to be cared for, and I'm not getting these things. In reality, it didn't work out great for the enslaved people. In general, the enslaved people were ignored whenever they would go speak to the people in power because the people in power usually benefited from the slave system itself. But the question is, why have a code? Why even do this? This is where we're getting interesting, okay? Why have a code? Because a code is the image, you can pretend that you're a human being. Okay? You can pretend that you are a compassionate and good person if you have a rational code. I'm not just randomly picking people up off from their villages and throwing them in boats and forcing them to work. I have reason. We're not yet at the Enlightenment, but we're heading up towards the Enlightenment and the value of reason. Reason will prevail. That's what this whole code thing is. It's them trying to say reason will prevail, but at the bottom of it all is an inhuman thing that you cannot reasonably do. You cannot, as Montesquieu would say, support slavery and call yourself a Christian. You cannot do it. They do not go together. It is impossible. You cannot square that circle. But if you have this code, you have the illusion of reason, the illusion of being correct. History is so important to study, everybody. How many Code Noir do we have now? But it wasn't all good. And it wasn't even all neutral. There's also things like this. The first time that a black tries to escape, he is branded. Second time, his hamstring is cut. What do you think happens the third time? Third time is death. There's a code. Okay. Hey, I don't want to do it, but there's a code. The king told me to do this. Just a little note here. That's the brand they would use. It's called the fleur de lis. It's a complicated symbol because, there's Louis XIV, the most powerful man in the world with the best legs of any king ever. That was his symbol, the symbol of his family, the House of Bourbon. And it's interesting because, it's used by the New Orleans Saints and it's used by the Boy Scouts. And sometimes people, I have students who study French and they'll show me a tattoo that they have of the fleur de lis. And I'm like, listen, the fleur de lis was branded on women who were sent to Quebec, prostitutes who were sent to Quebec, whose job was simply to have more babies in Quebec. Okay. That's one way it was used. The other way it was used was to brand enslaved people who tried to go away. So I would say, in general, let's try to stay away from the symbol of royal power. As a matter of fact, I want you to put that in your notebooks. That'll be a sign that you've been paying attention. I'm just going to look through and make sure that you have a fleur de lis that's crossed out. Now, I'm not going to show you the drawing I did because for some reason when I drew it, it just looked like a pot leaf. So it doesn't matter if it's a good drawing. Just do something that looks like a fleur de lis and cross it out because it's a very powerful symbol which we're very easy with. So I want to before I get to the homework, I want to close on this. It also said that enslaved people, that blacks are to be treated as objects, like furniture, like pieces of property, like they don't have the rights of a human being. But I want to remind you that they are also to be baptized Catholic in order to save their eternal soul. Do you understand? Why do you have a code? Because you're trying to solve what is called cognitive dissonance. That's where you know something is not true, but you have to pretend that it's true in order to be at peace with yourself. Okay. This is my iPhone. I have to have the cognitive dissonance of saying, I do not believe in child labor, even though child labor goes into making iPhones. I have to have that cognitive dissonance. It's an uncomfortable one, but we all live with a certain amount of cognitive dissonance. This is pretty extreme, though, because we have human beings who are baptized and they must be treated like objects. Remember this chair from last class? Do you remember how this chair, according to the Taino, has a soul? Well, I would say there's no harm in this. There's no harm in saying that an object has a soul, but there is harm in saying that a person with a soul is an object. You see the difference? The Code Noir, reason will prevail, is trying to tell us that a black enslaved person is Catholic furniture, furniture with a soul that will go to heaven. Reason will prevail. This is your homework for the third. Oh, we're getting pretty wild here. So the reading, the pre-revolution reader. Okay, so when you go into Brightspace, it's right there, the pre-revolution reader. It is comprised of pages 19 to 25 of the Black Jacobins, and then a little passage from Liberté, a Haiti anthology, a nice little anthology there. You write 8 questions and one long form question, or you can listen to the podcast, Web of Tension. Web of Tension. This is a awesome podcast. Man, this guy is so good. He's so good at making podcasts. And so those questions are up on Brightspace as well. And you can answer those questions as you listen along. As always, if you want to be an élève qui excellence, you'll do both. If you want to be an excellent student, you'll get the élève qui excellence points. But there you go. So I hope today's class was useful. I hope the point of it is clear. We're going to be studying Black XYZ, color XYZ, white XYZ as imaginary representatives of the people of Haiti as they go through all these changes over the next couple centuries. All right. I'll see you on Wednesday. Have a good Labor Day. How do I stop recording? After stopping, you'll receive an email notification when cloud recording is ready. Sounds good.